Good evening. My name is Tiffany Lemier. I'm the president of the Graduate Business Student Association, and we are pleased to welcome Michelle Davey. Michelle is the founder and CEO of Wheel. She's driven to help the industry's most innovative digital health companies change the status quo of healthcare delivery. She bridges her personal interests and professional experiences together at Wheel, including her healthcare enthusiasm for startups and knack for building talented teams. She brings a wealth of experience in talent acquisition and recruiting from her time both at Google and Favor Delivery, and most recently served as the head of global talent at Medici. Michelle grew up in a rural area with limited medical resources, ultimately leading to an autoimmune condition where undiagnosed for 15 years. She recognized the potential for telemedicine to expand access to care to more people, whether they lived in rural towns or urban cities. At that same time, with digital health adoption, she also noticed the healthcare industry was moving towards simply bringing a broken system online, stifling innovation, minimizing impact, and failing to look out for those at the center of healthcare engines, clinicians. This led her to found Wheel in order to reimagine the way virtual care is delivered and build the infrastructure to put clinicians back at the center of care. Michelle is excited about the opportunity to build a future of work in healthcare by empowering clinicians and reinventing healthcare delivery models that drive efficiency while upholding high quality care standards. She's also passionate about the work being done to eradicate bias in medicine against marginalized groups, as well as innovative models that expand access to care for patients, particularly with underserved populations. And tonight we'd like to introduce Dr. Single, who will be interviewing Michelle, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to her. So.
Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you to everyone who is attending, both in person and virtually. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us tonight and sharing your experiences with our students, our faculty. And I also would like to, since it is Veterans Day, acknowledge any veterans or current service members who might be in our audience here or virtually, and thank them for their service. So Michelle is actually an alum. She graduated with a major in international business. And so in looking at your LinkedIn profile, I've kind of looked at your trajectory since you graduated. And there's a saying that I'm going to paraphrase very badly, but that you only recognize a path when you look behind you and see where you've been. So I'm wondering, did you see yourself being on a path when you graduated from St. Edward's to where you are today? And if not, do you look back now and see what the through line was, what the connections were that got you where you are today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's great to be back. I was saying that the campus looks very different, but it's a beautiful campus and one I'm really proud to return to. So thank you for having me. So when I started my career right out of college, this is 2011, job market wasn't great. We were trying to figure out, coming out of school, what you're going to do with your career. And I think that's a really big ask of anybody trying to figure that out. So I would say, when I first went into my professional career, I was really looking to just get experience in an industry that I was interested in. Healthcare was that for me. You heard from my background, I grew up in a rural community, so didn't have access to care, and that affected my life in a number of different ways, and predominantly through an autoimmune condition that went undiagnosed. So healthcare was something I was really passionate about, and I was looking to gain that experience and just get in at any company where I could kind of get my foot in and start to develop that experience, understand the workforce, understand what it was like to work a 9 to 5. I had never done that. I had done, I had worked before, but never in a consistent manner because I was going to school. And so when I look back at my career now and how it's evolved, it actually feels like, there was a path that all came together, and that's how I came to Wheel. But every step of the way has been led by the passion that I have to try something new, to solve problems, to be in an industry that I can make change in. But those steps weren't planned to get here for real. It was very much driven based on kind of these changes in my life that I wanted to make an impact in my professional career. And now looking back, I always tell people, if you look at my professional career, it's like it all came together to start Wheel. And that's actually a great way to put it, paraphrasing the you don't know where your journey is going to take you, but it's easier to look back on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it's something a lot of students struggle with, and a lot of those of us who have walked more of the path, and I've probably walked a lot more of the path than you have, but we recognize that keep putting one foot forward, and you'll get where you want to go. But so what were you like as a student? Tell us a little bit about Michelle at 19.
Oh man, I would say I attended every class. I was really great. Yeah, I think for me, college was a really interesting time for me as personally, talking about my autoimmune condition. I had gotten sick several times throughout college. So trying to figure out how to balance that with going to school full time, at times 15 to 20 plus hours that I was taking. Predominantly, I was inside of the business school, which was really exciting. I was around like-minded people. I think for the first time, one of the things I actually really appreciated about St. Ed's was I was exposed to different diverse populations. I grew up in a very rural town, so everybody looked like me. Everybody had the same experiences as I did. And when I came to St. Edward's, I made friends with people who came from different countries, who came from different backgrounds. And that was really something that I still to this day take away from this school, is it really immersed me in a different culture and to understand different cultures. And then I predominantly took night classes because I couldn't wake up in the morning.
Well, I'm glad you saw that in yourself and planned around it instead of just signing up for morning classes and not going, right? So what would you say would be your biggest, one of the big things you took away? I know you talked about experiencing diversity for the first time at St. Edward's, but reflecting back on your education, can you think of something from that you now refer back to in running your business?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things that I always liked about St. Ed's and my education that I talk a lot about was some of my professors, whether they were adjunct or actual professors, they had been in these careers. They had been, a CFO somewhere in my business stats class. They had understood what it was like to be a manager in these types of roles. And so I think that's actually unique in school at times. It's like, people who have walked the walk and can tell you what it may be like, or what you may be seeing down the road. I thought that was always great. And actually, I call out my business stats class was actually where I started digging into healthcare. I did a project on the pharmaceutical industry, and my adjunct professor had been a CFO at a hospital before. So he was able to talk to me about that experience and in different parts of healthcare that I'd never seen from the patient perspective, the kind of administration piece. And that's actually what inspired me to say, what, I want to actually start a career in the healthcare field, not being a clinician, because I can't see blood, but like actually in the administrative part of it. And that's actually how I decided kind of that first step out for my career was going to be in healthcare.
So tell us a little bit more about Wheel, about the company's mission and your company's culture, because I've seen some references and even seen some of your employees make comments on your LinkedIn page about the company that suggests that you have a really great culture.
Yeah. So our vision and kind of mission is what we call to deliver great healthcare to everyone. So going back to this idea of access to healthcare shouldn't be a privilege. The geographic, socioeconomic, and then getting the right clinician for your care needs is really a basic right of all human beings. And for Wheel, we really rally around that mission. The people that join, the employees that we have, come in who want to make a difference, who have been either inside of healthcare or have a family member that's been affected. I mean, we all are patients at one point in our life. And so really the mission drives us to, this is very hard work at times. It's not always, the easy path, but it is one that's a meaningful path and you can see your impact. And I think definitely inside of startups and ones that are growing like Wheel, you can really see as you put in that work, the outputs and what happens and changes. Both for the people internally and our clinicians. So really impactful work that I'm super proud to represent. I think the team is incredible. From a culture standpoint, this is something that actually further back in my career at Favor has been a key cornerstone of my career of building cultures. Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that if people enjoy the work that they do, there's better outcomes. If not, it's really hard to stay motivated, to challenge yourself, to solve the really tough challenges that come up with changing an industry. And so my team's fantastic. Culture is not just like the shiny objects or what we call the foosball tables and the ping pong tables, even though we're not in person anymore and can't do that anyways. But it's about the people that you're around who all are aligned to the same mission, who are driving to the same goal. And then doing that in a way that creates a buy-in for everybody that, we're going to do this in a way, and we're going to be really nice to each other too. We're not going to be jerks about it. And so, yeah, we've had a great culture. The team has grown super fast, but one of the things that we do as a part of our interviewing is a values fit interview to make sure that not only from a skill set perspective, you can do the work, but that you actually fit the values of the company that we've laid out.
So can you give us any, without giving away any secrets that you don't want to reveal, examples of the sort of question you would ask someone in a values fit kind of interview?
Yeah, so a couple of, one of the values of Wheel is called empathy every day. It's about bringing empathy to the stakeholders that you're supporting. So for us, that's the clinicians, the patients, and even each other. I think at the end of the day, we all have different things going on in our life. So we will ask people, tell me about a time where you came across a person and you were challenged by them, and how did you handle that situation with empathy? Tell us about a time that you were empathetic towards, sometimes when they have siblings and they offer that up, we're like, your sibling. And I have 3 brothers, so I can understand that empathy towards your siblings is sometimes the hardest. But we ask those questions. Another one's about being trusted, and being trusted for us isn't like, do I trust you? It's more about accountability. So tell us about a time that you signed up for something and you were, you had to take the lead on a project and how you handled that. So just really starting to dig in, and we normally ask questions for the interviewee to tell us a story. Tell us about how you've approached this in the past. And sometimes people think when interviewing, it's all about their professional career. And especially if you're a new student, you know, you're going to come out and you maybe have some internships and some other work experiences, but you're likely not going to have a whole lot of professional experiences to draw from. But the personal experiences are just as important. You've been empathetic to your siblings before. You've been trusted and have accountability in your projects here at school. So you can draw from that as well.
That's great. I think that's really helpful because I know our students, when they are faced with writing that first resume and haven't had that many work opportunities while they've been in school, don't know what to put for skills that they have developed. And we try to help them think about, you know, even if they've worked in food service, for example, well, what great customer service skills they've developed by dealing with people in those situations. And so I think the message there is for them to really kind of reflect on those personal experiences in their lives before they go into an interview so that they can use some of that as well, especially if they don't have the work experience. Tell us a little bit about, as an entrepreneur, some of the biggest or the biggest lesson that you've learned. And then I'm going to ask you also maybe the biggest mistake.
Well, there's lots of lessons in being an entrepreneur. There's no blueprint. There's what works for one company doesn't work for the next company, and what works for one CEO may not work for the other. And you know, one of the things that you have to be open to as a founder, CEO, or entrepreneur is learning and iterating. You learn a lot, and most of the time through your failures, you probably learn the most through that. So I'd say, you know, one of the biggest things for me that I've always leaned on was people around me who had been in either a similar situation or they had found themselves like in a career shift or change. And again, people can draw from their experiences to help guide you in that. And that's been really great, I think. And then, I mean, last 2 years has taught me a lot about being a leader in a time of uncertainty, and a lot of one unprecedented event after the other. And actually, when I started my career and then I went into more of the HR and recruiting side, there's a lot of things that they said, you should never talk about this stuff at work. And now in 2 years, we're like having to talk about it as leaders. And so it's really about how do you do that with authenticity and listen to the team around you. So I think that's been a lot of the lessons in a really fast period is just lead with authenticity and be open to learning, because you're going to learn a lot all the time.
And I think too, being willing to admit when you don't know the answer.
Absolutely.
I think early on in leadership, you think, oh, I always have to have the answer. I have to have an answer, but there are times when you simply do not. And we've seen that a lot in the last year and a half. So a mistake now, because I think it helps for the students to realize that what seems to be this wonderful, magical career progression that you've had, I'm sure there have been some stumbles. We all have those.
Absolutely. I would say I make lots of those. And to your point, it's about being able to admit when you are making those mistakes and being able to say, this is the mistake I've made and learn from it. I'm trying to think of a recent one. I mean, there's probably one in the last couple of days, but really throughout my career, you know, there's been pivotal moments of what I thought was a mistake, and I definitely learned from it and got better. I'll talk about one that was a little over 2 years ago now, right before the pandemic hit. We were building the team. There's only 15 of us back then. So really small knit team that was working really hard. And we had a global pandemic kind of at our doorstep and everybody needing our services. And one of the things that I still think was a mistake that we did was we tried to help everybody and do everything. And there was only 15 of us, and we spread everybody so thin. And we worked really hard, and, for 3 months straight in the middle of this pandemic, locked into our homes. And then after 3 months of that, I think the team was pretty burned out. And we just kept pushing and pushing and just hoping that, there was some light at the end of the tunnel. And I admit that as a mistake because of one thing. I realized, I think now looking back, that we should have been more thoughtful about where we spent our time with the amount of resources that we had. We shouldn't have tried to take on everything. And then once we hit that point where the team was, quite frankly, exhausted from working that much, it is important to acknowledge your mental health in those moments. And a mistake was that we kept trying to push through it. I think now we have things that are like wheelie refresh days where people can take off and just focus on their mental health, whether that be go for a hike or spend time with their family or whatever helps them. But we learned that from that moment, because we looked back and nobody had taken a vacation in 3 months, and we had been working 12 to 14-hour days. And that was a mistake. But again, we learned from it. And now we're very thoughtful about, making sure that we're taking on the work that, mentally, physically we can handle as an organization. And if we can't, turning down that work, which is hard. But again, we've learned our lesson.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, because when I first looked at the company and was looking at information about you, and I thought, wow, how fortunate that you started this company and had the foresight before the pandemic to realize that this was an important area that needed attention. And then, well, I guess, this is a company where the pandemic kind of helped, but I think you pointed out something that maybe people might not think about immediately, and I didn't, was the challenge of growing too quickly. And if you're not prepared, you sort of are sitting there thinking, I want to take advantage of this opportunity, I can't let it go. But if you only have 15 people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been a lesson. And even now we've grown quite a bit. I think we're now 160 people. So, and growing very quickly. And so a lot of growth really fast. And there's all kinds of things and solving for that as well, because you are growing really fast. And how do you keep a team aligned? And the growth has been phenomenal on one hand, but it presents a number of challenges that comes with that.
So I'm going to pivot to a slightly different topic now, but I know you're very committed to mentoring female entrepreneurs. So what do you see as the biggest challenges for women, and particularly in the Austin business environment?
So I think I always tell people it's hard being a founder and CEO and entrepreneur, no matter what race, what sexual orientation, what identity you are. It's difficult regardless. So you should always reach out and find mentors. Like, anybody should have that around them, because lived experiences of others are the best way to help shape yourself, and without having to go through some of the mistakes and the pains that others have. So for me, it's particularly important to enable women to have access to another woman like myself who has seen that path, who has charted that path. And quite frankly, just sometimes it's because seeing somebody else do it opens up your mind to be like, I could do that. And for me, I didn't have at that early in my career, I didn't have another woman that I looked at and was like, oh, she went from being a desk job admin at the bare minimum wage, all the way to being a CEO, and what that journey created. And so I think there's that. I think particularly where I focus with other women is women who are looking at venture funding, and historically just women are underfunded towards men or against men. And so that's really where I focus, and enabling them to access capital to start their companies, and back their ideas by investors who are committed to helping women and diverse backgrounds set that up. Because when you look at venture capital, not only for women, but across the board, most of them come out of Stanford and Harvard, and most of them have MBAs, which maybe one day I'll come back here and do, but I haven't yet. And so for me, it's about having that diverse background that looks different than others, and helping people with different backgrounds understand that's okay, and where to use your strengths and how to set them up with the right people that will back them for that, and not look at it as a negative because it doesn't match what everybody else looks like.
Mhm. Are there any particular organizations in Austin that you would point out as good places to start for students that might want to get into that network of meeting potential mentors?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's one that just started about, it's called the Women Fund. And it is just women-based in here in Austin, whether they've been here for a while like myself, or new women who help other women in a number of different ways. It's not just financing capital, but it's also mentorship around team building, around thinking about the early days of a startup. So the Women Fund is one of them, and there's a couple other organizations I forget the name of, but that one is the one that I've probably been involved with the most. And then there's a ton of great communities, I would say, online as well. Now, as most of our lives are virtual, it really breaks down the geographical barrier, where you can access people who may be in New York, or maybe even in another country. And so there's a lot of different ways to access that, which I would highly, highly suggest, if you don't have a mentor now, seek that out. Seek somebody out, and it may be, they're your mentor for right now, and then as you get into your career, you find a new mentor. But try and learn as much as you can from somebody else who's willing to share their life experiences, because I think you can learn a lot, and it'll help shape kind of your, I wouldn't say it makes you who you are by any means, but it shapes your thinking of, oh, well, if they've learned this lesson before, maybe I can avoid learning that lesson through these mistakes, or maybe I should chart this path. So I would suggest seeking out a mentor, and just talking to people. I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think early on in our conversation, you talked about a professor here at St. Edward's, an adjunct professor who had the experience in the pharmacy, or as a hospital administrator, and that was a mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would come to class, and he probably, after that project, I would come and say, well, what about this? Who handles this? And I think probably now, looking back at it, he was very patient and let me ask a million questions. But yes, just finding and asking those questions, not being afraid to ask questions to people you find, and reaching out to them. I think LinkedIn's a great place to do that professionally, finding people who have a background that you're interested in, asking them how they got started. Most people are willing to answer, at least, or kind of lend some suggestions if they can't tell you where else you could look. And I did that early as being a founder. I reached out to a number of other founders on LinkedIn and just asked them about their journey. Where did you get started? Which was helpful to me. And still, I keep in touch with a number of them.
Mm-hmm. And I think, faculty here never mind when students ask them questions about their field and want to know more from them. We welcome that. So that's a good message, I think, for our students in the audience, not to be afraid to ask those questions, because between us, if we're complaining about anything about our students, it's like, why don't more come to see us in our office hours?
Yeah.
So, which are virtual now, but to share that passion that we have for our particular discipline area.
Yeah.
So speaking of things that we want to encourage the students to do, what skills would you in today's world emphasize or suggest that the students focus on while they're still in school, that they develop to jump into? I know it's very broad because we don't know what they're all going to do, but sort of basic skills that you see as really necessary that maybe you're looking for in new employees that you hire right now.
So there's one thing that we talk a lot about at Wheel. It's called analytical skills. How do you look at data and interpret what the data is telling you and show that in a way that is like comprehensible outside of just numbers? I would say students at this time have such a leg up, and where the rest of the industry that's maybe 10 years out, you still have the opportunity. And while you're in school, you should definitely take the time to think about the technology that you're using and getting comfortable with. I spend half of my day in Excel and Google Docs, which I never thought that was going to be the case. I think when I was here at school, maybe I brought a laptop. No, I don't think I did yet. Maybe my senior year. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of the technology that's embedded in our daily lives that you all are working on today within school that I would highly suggest leaning into that. And when we're talking about resumes, and you maybe don't feel that you have maybe the work experience, but I mean, you have a greater deal of technical ability than a lot of people in the workforce right now. And so I would say lean into that. Data analytics is an area, and data visualization is an area that we're constantly thinking about. And sometimes that's as simple as making a chart on a Google Slides or something like that, but enabling people who maybe aren't as tech savvy or can dig into the numbers, showcasing that in a way that's comprehensible to a lot of people. I would say that's definitely a skill set right now.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And that's something that we're definitely trying to get ahead of with our curriculum too, is incorporating a lot more of the analytic skills across the board in our undergraduate and our graduate programs.
Great.
So glad to know we're on the right track.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we also emphasize and always have at St. Edward's is the importance of ethics. And I'm wondering if now that, it's easy to talk about ethics in the classroom and everybody knows kind of what the right answer should be. But once you get out in the real world, it's much harder sometimes to use the right answer. So I wonder if you can share any experiences or thoughts on that and how maybe your St. Ed's education helped you navigate.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, I think that's always been one of the values personally of myself, is around my ethics, and why I think St. Ed's aligned so well to when I was choosing a college. And that's really been brought throughout my career. So thinking about ethics in my professional career, I mean, it's been widespread, but definitely in healthcare, I think at the end of the day, we are always trying to make decisions around building a company that's scaling and growing. And at the end of the day, these are patient lives. So it's not that we can, just say, oh, we're going to scale as much as we want and like break all of the rules. And then, patients are affected and people like us are affected. So healthcare is a very regulated field as well. One that at times you'd be like, well, why is that regulation there? But it's important because it is patient lives at the end of the day. And I think one of the things about ethics is it's what you do when nobody's looking, when nobody's going to find out. And sticking to that ethics is important, because not only could somebody find out, and that may be harmful for you and your career and your company, but it's the integrity that you have as a human being to say, again, you're not going into your professional career and just totally shutting off your personal life. And so you carry that throughout. And even more now, I would say our lives are very, they're very fluid, of like how much of this is work and how much of it is at home. I sit in my home office. And so it's very easy to just walk over to my couch. And so what I was saying was, you don't really turn off that personal life, and you shouldn't turn off that ethics as well, just because nobody's looking. That's a really important thing. And I think at the end of the day, if you don't know the right decision, if you don't know if this is going to turn out well or bad, again, just ask the question. People won't get mad. Nobody gets mad about people asking questions. And I think that was something that took me a little while to learn, is if I didn't know the answer, A, I would Google it, or B, I would ask the question.
Well, I want to sort of conclude our part of the conversation with asking you what advice you would give to your 18-year-old self.
That's a great question. Oh, there's probably a really long list. I think first and foremost, I think we started the conversation here, but don't feel like you have to have it figured out when you're leaving school. Even if you think you do, it's probably going to be very different than you thought you did. So that I think has been the cornerstone for me of looking back, is I had no idea. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. That was deep ingrained in me. My family has a business, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to start something. I wanted to make change and impact. So I knew that, but I had no idea how I was going to get there. And I thought very differently. Actually, coming into St. Ed's, I was like, I want to trade wine internationally. That is very different than what I do today. So I had none of that figured out. But what I did know about myself was I could solve really hard problems. I was passionate about solving problems, and I was passionate about making an impact in this world. And that's what led me every step of the way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Tiffany, would you like to field questions from our audience, either in here or through the chat? I think
Yes.
they can.
Would you like me to ask from?
Yes, come
Yeah.
on.
Awesome. So the first question we have is, you're obviously very passionate about healthcare. Do you partner with other businesses and government officials to help drive your agenda?
So we haven't partnered with the government yet. I think there's actually in healthcare, for the first time ever, actually, in the current healthcare administration, there's bipartisan support for what we're doing. So there's a lot of good stuff coming out of the government there. We do partner with other businesses quite often. Actually, partnerships inside a business is pretty common. I think it's really about finding the right partners, again, who can enable you to continue your innovation, can move the business forward, but also have some of those same ethics you do, because there's a lot of businesses that don't. And so how do you choose those partners and vet those partners is really important. But today we don't work with the government, but not saying we won't, because the government is involved with a lot of healthcare.
And also your bio mentioned that you worked for other companies like Google before starting your own business. Do you recommend that other potential entrepreneurs start working for other companies, or would you recommend if they start out on their own?
I want to answer that with it totally depends. Depends what you're going to do and where your experiences are. For me, it was really important to work at some of these companies in a larger organization or small startups, because it helped me figure out how to work in business and how to work with others in business and navigate that. A lot of the companies I worked with, like Medtronic and Google, have extensive training programs. So it's honestly like almost going back to school. And so I would sit inside of those. But what it taught me was a lot about my craft, a lot about my field, a lot about how to interact and work with others. And that was really important. So for me, it was important to gain the skill set to get where I'm at today. But I can say, if you have skills and you have the passion for something you want to do, you don't always have to go that route. But I do think there's benefits to doing it that way.
Ethics earlier regarding work-life balance. What is your philosophy about work-life balance, and do you consider that to be an ethical issue?
That's a really great question. I love that we get to talk about this. I think when I first started my career, work-life balance wasn't really a thing. We weren't talking about it. We weren't talking about it in the form of ethics. So for me, it's difficult. Don't get me wrong. Again, working out of a home office and then also being in your home, it really quickly melds together your work life and your home life. I'm sure as students, you feel that quite a bit. But what I do find in work-life balance for me is about what works for me. For me, that is still to this day, I don't like to wake up early. So I spend the morning, really preparing and getting ready. And that's the time where my brain's thinking creatively. So I don't go right away and sit in front of a computer. I spend that time hiking with my dogs or just going on a run or taking that time for myself. So that's very different, where some people think, you have to take these long, whether it's a vacation or things like that, but just figuring out what works for you, what makes you happy, and how you can continue to do the things you love and work, and how that all comes together. And I'll say again, it's very fluid. Some months I'm much more intense in work because that's what it's demanding. But I try and recognize, not only for myself, but my employees, when we're getting to that point. And hopefully, you're surrounded by people who can also point that out. Sometimes it's best when other people tell you, hey, like, you're looking like you're working a lot. Have you taken the time? And that doesn't come from a bad place, but so I'd say it totally depends. From an ethics perspective, I really love that. And I actually hadn't thought of it that way. But yes, I do think from a business ethics perspective, leaders and their companies should be thinking about their organizations and thinking about what's important to their team's mental health and the work-life balance. But again, giving the flexibility to the employees and each other to determine what that looks like instead of determining it for them.
For our next question, as CEO and co-founder, what does your typical day look like?
Well, I don't wake up early. I think I've said that enough in this conversation, but I spend the hours in the morning really focused on myself and getting ready and working out and getting myself mentally and physically prepared for the day. My days look very different every single day. I have a lot of Zoom calls these days. So I probably have 10 to 15 Zoom calls. I spend a lot of time with not only external, so PR and talking to other people in the industry, but also a lot of time with my team. So I've hired a lot of really smart people who are solving really hard challenges. And now as the company's grown, they're filling me in with all these amazing projects I didn't even know were happening. So I spend a lot of time helping the team get unblocked, but also getting caught up with where the business is trending, and then helping drive the strategy to ensure that we're all going to the same goal. We all know where we're headed. So That is kind of what my day looks like, but again, it can be very different day to day.
You also mentioned how important it is to mentor, but is there anyone that you admire who you consider to be a mentor?
I have several mentors still to this day. I spend time with all of them monthly, at least once a month, whether that's on Zoom or in person. I'm thinking about a couple different ones. One professionally, I would say, is my mentor, Jason Chicola. He's the CEO of Rev.com. He founded Upwork. So very similar marketplace experience level work. And he's like light years ahead of me. He's done this several times over. And again, those learned experiences, sometimes not totally applicable to what I do, but just somebody who can be empathetic to the situation that I'm in or the problem that I'm trying to solve, or just, really cheer me on the little things that I didn't know I should be celebrating. So he's been phenomenal. I would say the other mentor, as cheesy as it sounds, is my father. He's my first call, even when something big and great happens at work. I call my father first. He was an entrepreneur. Founded his own company, recently retired this year after 50 years. So, again, not totally applicable. He used to tell people I was in telecom, not telehealth, very different. But that's okay, because his experiences are different, but they are meaningful for me. And he can relate. So those are my two I would call out. And then there's just some incredible people here in Austin, across the board. There's just people in Austin who have been in the startup community, have done this several times. And then just friends, I think, who have mentored me through life.
So this is sort of a twofold question. One is granular, one is a little broad. So how has the pandemic affected your business personally, just from a telehealth perspective? And how do you think the pandemic has affected healthcare overall?
So the pandemic, I say, always has highlighted how broken the healthcare system is. And fundamentally, there are really good people inside of the healthcare system, but systematically it was set up in ways that made it really hard for those really great people to deliver care, and those people are clinicians. And as we tried in the first kind of revolution of tech and healthcare to help clinicians, by kind of bringing the paper forms that we fill out at the doctor into technology, what we did was actually place more burden on them. And I think that was something highlighted by the pandemic and how hard that was. But for us, it really didn't change our business model. We had in 2018 came out saying, like, there was this problem, there was no infrastructure, nobody was looking out for the clinicians, and they were a key part of this. Not a key, they're like the main part of this, and they were on the front lines. And so it didn't change our business model, but it solidified it. Pre-pandemic, there was very small use cases at that time for telehealth, and they were growing, predominantly urgent care or low acuity care. And since the pandemic, I think there's just been a wave of innovation happen in healthcare and continuing. We're still at the very early days. But the amount of innovation coming to the space from people outside of healthcare, from people that were in fintech and tech and real estate and gaming, like all are coming to healthcare to apply their different thinkings to evolve healthcare in a way where clinicians have a better work-life balance and can see patients and focus on the patient care that they deliver, all the way to patients have a great experience. We don't have to, if we don't need to go into in person, we don't have to. We can get help online, whether that's mental health or urgent care, or your primary care visits, but it's about that access. So I think the pandemic helped unlock that just by driving behavior change for patients, but also the clinical community as well. But we're still very much in the early innings of the innovation that's happening.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. So the next question is, and these will be personal questions actually. Are there any books that you would recommend to future entrepreneurs?
Oh man, there's a lot of books. From a business perspective, the one I really like is 7 Powers. I think that's a really interesting book, and as an entrepreneur, it's one I recommend to a lot of people. Trying to think of some other ones. I read a lot about healthcare, so that's probably not not as interesting to people. But there's this one book called The Disruption of Medicine, and it's talking about all of the first evolution of disruption and what needs to continue to happen, which I'm also a big fan of.
Wonderful. And the last question is, what do you do to decompress? What do you do for fun?
Couple things. I really enjoy hiking with my dogs. I think one of the benefits of being in Austin, there's a lot of great green belts and places. I also have 2 dogs, so they also enjoy that time, especially as we're cooped up in the house for many months together, but now can kind of be outdoors. The other one I would say is like just decompressing and seeing friends. I think it's important to continue to have a life outside of your work, even if your work is kind of a very passionate part of your life. It's important to have people who aren't just in your work community, but also I've had relationships with people from college. I've had relationships from high school that I try and maintain and just get to hang out with them. As you grow up, you shouldn't stop having fun and hanging out with your friends, because I think it does help with the decompression. And again, those shared lived experiences, while not totally all the time applicable to the work, it's meaningful. And I think you should still try and make meaningful relationships as you grow older.
Wonderful. I think that's everything. That's all the
Okay.
questions.
We have a question in the chat on Zoom.
Great.
Tracy's asking, you are constantly in motion in your career as you work at various companies. You mentioned you gathered skills from each. Would you recommend that a person do the same as opposed to stay for a prolonged period to gain experience?
Also great, great question, and it totally depends. For me, every time that I moved jobs, it was for a couple of reasons. First, I was passionate about something else. So when I was coming out of healthcare, the reason I went into tech was because I wanted to see more fast-paced kind of innovation that was happening. Healthcare at the time was very antiquated and took a long time to get change done. So that was the reason I moved to tech. Once I saw that, I fell in love, the pace at which innovation can happen inside of tech. But then when I joined a startup, Favor was 3 people in a house, in a tiny little house. I was really passionate about the product. Food delivery was really interesting to me, but building something was what I was seeking out. So for me, I was seeking out different learning experiences. And if I were to stay at Google longer and I really wanted to build something, it's much harder to do that in a larger organization. So I sought that out at a different organization and a different kind of structure. But if you're still learning and you still are getting those learned experiences through a company, I would suggest staying there. You can learn, and as the company still growing, you can learn a lot. But definitely there's different paths. And I would say it's always about what you want out of that, and are you learning from those experiences, and are you passionate, are you satisfied, are you feeling like you're still driving and still really passionate about the work that you do. Not every day is great, don't get me wrong, even as a CEO, not every day is great, but if you are enjoying the work and really enjoying what you're doing, I would say I would continue to stay and still learn from that company.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Single, I think those are all the questions.
Well, I just wondered if anybody in the room had any questions. We sort of jumped right into. Mhm.
So my question was, did the pandemic bring more challenges to your company, or did it bring more benefits and kind of like jumpstarting?
I would say it probably brought more benefits. Pre-pandemic, it was really hard for people to see the world that I was trying to show them. Let's put it that way. The need wasn't big enough yet, which I think is important to think about as an entrepreneur starting a company. Is the need really there from the market perspective? But the need wasn't big enough yet. But what I was trying to show people was it was going to happen. And I didn't know that a global pandemic was coming. I don't think any of us did. But when it happened, I talked about some of the challenges early and the growth that we've had. So there's been incredible benefits, but it really solidified our business and said, oh, what you had been saying was going to happen in 10 years happened right now. And so we had to grow at a different pace, which presents its different challenges. But I would say it was highly beneficial and helping the world see the vision that I had laid out and I had seen.
Any other questions? Cliff?
You've grown so rapidly from 15 to 150 people. How has your role as a leader changed from 15 to 150?
Very different. When it was 15 people, I was still on the phones talking to doctors. I was still working in the business. I was still very active on the front lines of the things that we were doing. I always say that my job changes every 4 months because of how fast we're growing. So I went from what I call being a player, meaning I was in the weeds working on the business, to then being a player coach. So I was leading a team at that point, helping set the vision, but also helping just with the day-to-day management. But then I was also still working on the business. Now my role is much more of the coach and the leader role. I don't spend a lot of time, if any, throughout the day, like working in the business on projects or things like that. Most of that is being done by the team, and they're bringing it up to me for recommendation or opinion. And now bulk of my day is spent around aligning not only the internal team, but the entire industry around kind of what we're doing, et cetera. And over the last 2 months, it's changed again to being a lot more external. And the day-to-day business, my COO runs a lot of the day-to-day business of all those projects I was talking about bubbling up and somebody needing a recommendation on how to move forward. That's driven now through a different executive predominantly. And I spend most of my time externally, talking to other founders, other companies, and people all across the healthcare industry. So very different. Yes.
Going off of that, I have a question in regards to, you know how you mentioned you have different roles like every month.
Mm-hmm.
How are you preparing yourself for the months to come with, you know, new changes of roles? Like, is anybody preparing you for like what you might see in the future because of how fast your company is growing?
Yes, that's why I have so many mentors, because I'm looking for people who have been there before me and seen kind of what's coming around the corner. At least can help me plan what may be coming next for the business. And then I also have investors that have done this across hundreds of companies now that also help me know kind of the next milestones that the business is going through, et cetera. So I would say definitely. And sometimes the business just grows overnight and you don't know that that's going to happen. And that's where the problem solving comes in, and making sure that you're thinking about the business for the long term, not just kind of what's happening in the moment. Sometimes you have to solve for the moment, but thinking about how that impacts the long term. But definitely seek out mentors. And like I said, sometimes those mentors change over time because maybe they've seen one side of the business, and in the early stages, they're really great at, the 0 to 50 people. But then when you're getting to now, hundreds of people, that is a very different role that you play. And so there's that, but I also, I have a coach that I meet with every week, and he helps me kind of plan the business and do retrospectives on the last time we talked and how we were feeling. So very much like a professor, has me still kind of thinking about how am I growing in my role.
Any last questions? Well, thank you very much, Michelle.
Absolutely.
Fascinating to hear about your experiences, and I hope we can have you back again for other classroom visits as appropriate, or visits like these. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.